Yeah, it's on? Okay. So when Leslie and I lived in Abilene, there was a neighbor that had asked us to dog sit for their neighbor. So they were across the street. Yeah, it's kind of confusing, but they had been asked to dog sit, and then they had to go out. And it was like on a Friday and Saturday that you're supposed to dog sit. And so we would just go over there in the backyard and water and feed the dog and whatnot. And then on Friday night at like 10, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to do that this evening, so I need to go there and do that. And I went over there like 10 at night, go into their backyard. I don't really know these people, but I'm doing it for the neighbor that I do know. Everybody's gone. And while I'm like digging around in the dog, like on their deck, getting the food, making all the noise, turning on the water and everything, all of a sudden a light comes on. Yeah. And so like their bedroom light comes on. And I go to feed the dog, and the dog has food that I have not put down. What is going on? Well, anyway, turns out that when I turn my phone on Saturday, because my phone is always turned off on Friday, that the neighbor that asked me to do that had texted me, hey, don't go there, they're back. And so I was actually breaking into this family's backyard, looking back on it. They had no idea what was going on. I didn't know them well enough to go explain the situation. And I tell you all that to say I have a lot of stories like that. When we first started doing this, when we first started turning off my phone on Thursday night, and I would give it to the kids and they would hide it. And then on Saturday, it was turned off. They would, we would play like hide and seek or like hot cold until I found it. And there was plenty of times, more than 3 or 4 times. I mean, right, babe? Like that. But it felt like a lot that they forgot where they hid it. So we would have a Saturday full of cleaning as we're looking for the phone. And I tell you all that to say, if there was one thing that I love doing ministry, I love my job. And a lot of people who are in ministry for a long time, especially my age and younger, they get burnt out real easy. And if there was one thing that I could say to young ministers, but really to all of us, it's do what we're talking about tonight. Sabbath. Most of us, if you grew up in church, when you think of Sabbath, you think that Jesus was against it. He wasn't. He practiced it. He was against making it an idol. And you only make good things idols. So here's what Sabbath is. Sabbath is what God gives the Israelites after they've been delivered from slavery. Sabbath is God's way to tell them and me and you, you're not in slavery anymore. And every week, my whole family gets to experience that.
Okay. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And on the 6th day, God created humans in God's image. And God gave humans dominion over the plants and the animals, the birds and the sea creatures, but God did not give dominion to humans over time.
Right.
Not to the day, not to the night, not to the sun and moon and stars, nor the seasons. All those elements of time that are there that we don't necessarily see. That's an observation from Shelley Miller in her book on Sabbath. The first night, day that we think of for human beings, day 7 in the 7 days of creation, that first day was a day of rest. A day of rest. We're created in God's image to work. God works. God worked all that week. He worked 6 days. But then he rested from the work that he had done. And that's part of who we are as a human creature, is we're created also for rest. He blessed the 7th day and he made it holy, because on the 7th day he rested from all that he had done. And then he said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Those of you who think that your efforts to get everything done before 5 o'clock or after 5 o'clock or whenever you get it done, those of you who are doing overtime so you can get the latest gadget that you think will satisfy that craving that you've let loose in your soul, come to me, all of you who are heavy laden, and I will give you Sabbath rest. Learn from me. Perhaps you learned that you are what you do. Typically, what's the first thing you ask somebody at a dinner party? Besides, not a bad spread. You typically ask them what they do for a living. And when they answer you, "I'm a paralegal." Does that resonate with anybody? How does that change how you perceive me? "I'm a volunteer firefighter. I drive truck." That was my thing, to drive the engines.
Huh.
Does saying those occupations...
I didn't know you drove a fire truck. That's awesome. There's still a little boy in here.
Oh,
Laura.
yeah. I know a chief. He can get you on a truck.
I like that a lot, actually.
They do birthday parties. I'm just kidding. Perhaps the all-distracting activity of work numbs your pain. It did for me for a long time. Most of my career, I've been a workaholic. There is a 12-step recovery group called Workaholics Anonymous. There's a reason for that. Work can be a process addiction as much as food and other activities, spending, gambling, other things. Those are called the process addictions because there's a not visibly chemical substance involved, but there's certainly chemistry involved in that. But what do you gain if you get those gadgets, if you get that overtime, if you satisfy that deadline but lose your own soul in doing that? So let's pair and share. I always get that wrong. Pair up and share. And if you would, find somebody right around you. We're just going to spend a few minutes doing this, about 5 minutes. There's 2 questions. I'll give you the first one. We'll talk a little bit, and then we'll do the second one. So our brother, A.J. Svoboda, he was my professor in school. So for me, he's Dr. Svoboda. And for Jonathan, we found out over the summer that they're really good friends. So we've been exchanging information. But A.J.'s written a book, which I would commend to you. It's called Subversive Sabbath. One of the questions that he asked that I'd like you to share with your partners is, can you identify areas in your life where work or achievement has served to numb you or to give you your identity? And don't think about work as what you get paid for. You could think of it as any activity that is all-consuming for you, whether that's being a parent, running a household, taking care of your parents, whatever that might be. Go ahead. Can you identify areas in your life where work or achievement served either as a numbing agent or to provide you your identity? So, if you haven't switch your partners so the other person can answer the question. Yeah, I didn't either. Okay, here's your second question. Here's your second question. Again, 2.5 minutes. When is heavenly sunlight filling your soul with glory divine? When is heavenly sunlight filling your soul with glory divine? Y'all just sang it. You must have experienced it. Share that. When does that happen for you? When does your soul fill with God's glory? Yeah, and with that guy out there. Just being with him. Let me just, one sentence. It's that guy back there. Okay? Come back to us. Come back to us, y'all. Ding, 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 ding. Chicken dinner.
You want me to start?
So, Eugene Peterson had this paraphrase for something Jesus said. He said, Come to me and learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I hope that's kind of what you sense when you feel God's glory within you, is that rest for your souls.
So, the truth is, like whenever I talk about Sabbath, and I talk about this a lot, normally just not in a public setting, I talk about it over lunches and to parents and all those kind of things, because it's like the most neglected thing, I think, in Americans period, but also in American Christianity. Like, I don't know how your joy level is, but if it's low, then there's a chance you're neglecting this spiritual habit. And the truth is, you will take a Sabbath. It's not, the choice is it going to be a happy Sabbath or a sad Sabbath? I mean, there could be a Sabbath where, it's hospital bed and or red and blue lights. That kind of life does not lead to joy and flourishing. Something she said earlier made me think of this, but one of the interesting things about the Christian tradition is it's got really good grammar to talk about our lives. And one of the words that used to describe workaholism, which I would argue in America is not considered a pathology, it's considered normal. Like, in fact, if you don't do it, then it's not normal, but it also leads to great unhappiness. The word that is used for workaholism in the Christian tradition is sloth, which is what a lot of y'all think of when you think of, what comes to mind when you think of sloth? Laziness, right. Like, consider the ant, you sluggard. But sloth is not just that. In fact, in Proverbs alone, there's all these other places. Like the sluggard says, there's a lion ahead, even though there isn't, and so he stays in bed. The sluggard is somebody who's inventing problems. They're bringing tomorrow's problems today. Sluggard, and this is where this really was convicting to me about 10, 12 years ago. Workaholics are often staying at the office to avoid the hard work at home. Or you do the hard work here because you don't want to do the hard relational work there. Or it's vice versa, home and office. It's the stuff that God is actually calling you to do with your life. You're not engaging it because you don't think it's worth it. That your God-given life isn't worth actually living. So workaholism can fit in there. And you can feel quite productive and quite good doing something that's leading you away from joy and life. So I was just telling Laura, I'm going to go ahead and read this quote anyway because I wasn't originally, but there's a guy named George Cloutier. Anybody know who he is? Guy who specializes in maximizing productivity. He's well respected in his circles. Kind of the stuff that we talked about a few weeks ago in this Theology of the Body series about the industrial. We're just treating each other like we're cogs in a machine. Well, this guy knows how to make us more efficient cogs. And here's what he says. This is not a parody. This is not Babylon Bee. This is real advice to real people. As far as birthdays and anniversaries, you should absolutely make note of them. But not by taking long visits to the country with your spouse or going off on weekend getaways. That's what jewelry is for. Or treat everybody to a steak dinner. It takes less time, so you can get on with running your business. If you're not focused, if family, friends, and loved ones fill up your busy weekly schedule, you're probably failing to deliver real profits for your company. Love your business more than your family. It is not an easy or popular attitude to adopt. Often you will feel tremendous pressure by those jerks to take away your time and devote your business to family matters. But he doesn't say jerks, that's me. But in the end, the best thing you can do for them is to create the legacy of a business that is thriving and financially sound. And when you're retired, wealthy, and able to spend Valentine's Day and other special occasions with your kids and grandkids at your winter home in Hilton Head, you'll be glad that you devoted so much of your time to your first love, your business. Okay, now, y'all don't like this. Yeah, thank you, Adam. Somebody needed to boo it. You don't like this, but this is in our air. And what we normally don't say it that loudly or clearly, I mean, obviously we would, but I can tell you, I've sat with this guy at the end of his life. And guess what? When you have time to spend time on Valentine's Day, they're not there. Your kids don't want it. They don't know you. Like I know this guy. I've sat with him 100 times, and he would trade anything he could. He would spend all that money, all those homes back for a chance to do it over. And you don't have to make that mistake. Sabbath is God's weekly habit of reminding you you're not in slavery anymore. So here's Israel kept Sabbath for years and years. You do not have to do it on a Saturday. I mean, we don't have to be legalistic about this. But just some practical tips. You need to disconnect. You need to disconnect from stuff. It needs to be stuff that brings you life, and try to make it convenient for the people in your immediate circle, like your family. You know what I'm talking about? The people in your household, or whoever that is, if you're single. That you are connected to people, and you're doing stuff that gives you life and joy. That's kind of there's more. If you want to talk more about Sabbath, you can come up to either one of us. But I put up my phone, and it's wonderful. Ride four-wheelers with my boys, play basketball, sleep in. The stuff we do on Family Day. I talked about this my first Sunday at PV. Do y'all remember that? Like, my phone's turned off on Friday. I know it's inconvenient, but trust me, you'll like me better over the long haul. Because here's what you're saying to your soul. That you are not as important as you thought you were. The work is done even when it isn't. And God is in charge so you can take a nap. I mean, this is page 1 of the Bible. God is describing how we're made in His image. So it's not just real work that comes from that. It's not just real rest, it's real work. So think about this. What did the Israelites do when they were in slavery? They built pyramids and stuff, but what they build it with? Bricks. And at one point, they were like, we don't have instrumental music. Sorry, is that you, Sonia? Yeah. Yeah. Just kidding. I'm sorry. You're new. We're so glad you're here. I was making a joke thinking it was Sonia and her agenda. So, yeah. Just kidding. So, they were building bricks. They were building with bricks, and the Egyptian Pharaoh did not want them to build. They didn't have enough straw. And so what did the Pharaoh do? Yeah, he made them make more bricks with less straw. So the treadmill of efficiency is and they can't do anything about it. Okay, so God brings them out of slavery, gives them a Sabbath, and later on in the book of Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 6. So here's the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah's in the Old Testament. He's got a great job. They're in exile. They're in the kingdom of Babylon. And he's the cupbearer for the king, which is a great job because basically means you taste all the stuff before the king does to make sure nobody's trying to kill him. But you get to eat all the stuff the king does, and you get to be right by the king. And one day the king likes Nehemiah. So he says, Nehemiah, your face is downcast. He's like, why is that? He's like, well, the city of Israel, the Jerusalem is vulnerable. Its walls are in disrepair. And the king is like, you know what? I like you, Nehemiah. Why don't you take a group of guys and you all go over there and rebuild the wall? And that's the whole story. The whole reason that Nehemiah is in there is because the Israelites got to go back. Some of them got to go back and build a wall. That's the whole book of Nehemiah. But and it's so great because in Nehemiah chapter 6, there's like all these lists of dudes who all they did was build a wall. And when the Bible comes out, they're like, I'm in there. It's just, it's really cool because it honors the dignity of manual labor. But in Nehemiah, here, I'll just read it from here. In Nehemiah, at the end of it, or towards the end of it in chapter 6. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul, because we all know when that is. In 52 days, when all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of God. Now, guess what they were doing when they were building that wall? Guess what they used to build it? Bricks. just like in Egypt. But this is a different kind of work, and it's a different way to work. They're doing it, but they're doing it with God. They're not as slaves. This is the original vision of God, for us to work as partners, not because we have to, but because we get to. We don't work for Pharaoh. We work for God. And God is at work.
So this much is true. Sabbath is not a hall pass for responsibility or compassion. Meaning, just because you're on the Sabbath doesn't mean that you should let your oxen die if they've fallen into a ditch. That's one of the laws. You can get your oxen out of a ditch. You can help the guy who's laying on the side of the road. You can fix your friend's flat tire. You can feed the neighbor's dog. Just don't break and enter.
Yeah.
And in this, we are called to be faithful to our Christ, and to show compassion, and to show responsibility to others with discernment. Don't go all crazy and book your entire Sabbath to put a roof on somebody's house. That is an act of compassion. It is an act of service. But that's not what Sabbath is really for. What defines work and rest? Well, that's kind of a heart thing. And one of the things we're doing in all of our practices is tuning our hearts to what God is doing in the world and how he wants us to engage in that. So tune your heart. You might ask the question, are you entering into love and goodness and peace? Or does this event that you have going on for your Sabbath create turmoil for you? Like having a house full of people and making a big dinner. For some of us, we have asthma attacks for that. For others, it's truly a great joy. It's a source of joy to have a family, friends, everybody, and a feast. But what brings your heart joy and isn't toiling? Can you choose? Jonathan talked about trusting God and taking a nap. One of the things that happens when we sleep, if we can sleep, for insomniacs, this is one of the adjustments for them, perhaps. But we have to trust that we can go to sleep and God's going to take care of everything like he always does anyway. It's not that bad things won't happen when you're sleeping. It's not that bad things don't happen in the daylight anyway. But you're giving up a certain level of sense of control that you don't really have. Well, that's kind of what happens on Sabbath. Can you choose to enter into a time with your family, however you might define that, with the people you love, to light your little light, to rest, and to enjoy and rest in God's trustworthiness? That's what Sabbath can be about.
Some practical things and then a closing story. Oh, but I'll do that right before the closing story. So when this first started, I was in a really bad place. I was really burnt out. And I was like, like now when a 25-year-old is like, it's really heavy. You're like, oh, you don't know heavy. You know what I'm talking about? It's like that. Like looking back on it now, I'm like, please. Wait till you have 5 kids, buddy. But I was like, I felt like I was burning the candle at both ends. I couldn't do enough to make everybody happy, and Leslie was like the last person that I was thinking about trying to keep happy because I got all these other people, and I really want them. Anyway, too much into my interior life, but I'm trying to explain to you what drove me to this. It was desperation. because I was getting a temper problem. I was developing some really bad habits that I've heard a lot of people talk about leading them to some really dark places. And so I thought, okay, what can I do? I get off on Fridays and nobody else does. So I could do something then. And when I first started turning off my phone, I'm not saying that's what you should do, but I'm telling you what happened to me. I felt a sense of anxiety the first few weeks. Like, what if somebody needs me? What if, and over the course of, I would say, between 3 and 6 months, on Thursday afternoon, I couldn't wait. Because there is nothing like not being on call with your life. And I don't think many of us know what that's like. And it changes the way you live. I mean, our whole life is oriented around this. I mean, we homeschool our kids for this. Like, that's, and I'm not saying do that. I'm saying figure out a way to make this happen. I dare you. I dare you. Just try it for 3 months. You'll never be the same. You'll never be the same. This is a spiritual habit that changes some changes you pretty immediately. I mean, you've got to give it 3 or 4 weeks, but it will bring life to places that you haven't experienced before if you aren't experiencing this habit. Okay, I want to tell a story, but before I do that, next week we're packing for hungry people in Arkansas, which is awesome. The week after that, I am not going to be here because I'm speaking at Harding's lectureship that night. And I'm bummed because Dustin Freeman, who is one of the pastors at St. Andrews, Laura and I asked him to come to talk about the church calendar. And this as a spiritual habit. Like, you guys think today is September 14th. It's actually 2 months before Advent in ordinary time. And that's what... It's just a different way of thinking about what kind of world you're in and what kind of time you're in. This is not something that we're trying, I love the church calendar. I love it as family. We do Lent, we do Advent, all those kind of things. But he's going to tell you a little bit about why it's important, or why it's important to consider. It's a great spiritual habit. Okay, so the closing story. And shepherds, what shepherds are here? If you guys could, would y'all come up here and stand while we do this? If you want some prayers of some godly people, if something's going on in your life, they're going to be right down here. Everybody Loves Raymond. How many of y'all watch that show? Okay. It's great premarital counseling stuff. Let people see this is the real stuff. So when he finished filming Everybody Loves Raymond, it's a wrap, standing ovation, all that stuff. And he told the studio audience, he came out from the set and told the studio audience, we could have kept doing this show for many more seasons. But he said, 15 years ago, when I left home and came to New York to try to make my way in comedy, when I opened up my suitcase, as soon as I got to New York, my brother had put a note in there. And all it said was, what does it profit a man if he gains his whole world and loses his soul? And then he said, over the last 10 years, I feel like I have gained the world. And now it's time to work on my soul. And that's what this is. So, godly people are right here. Consider adding Sabbath as a habit. And until next time, go in peace.